What are the most concerning parallels between today's developments and dystopian visions and things that we get like from the movie The Terminator? Maybe more so the sequel because they kind of mention it in the first one. We see
Yeah.
he starts with the after effect, right? The robots scratch stepping on the skulls and stuff. But most of those movies take place in the present day. But as someone posted a meme today, quite coincident or serendipitously, I saw it before our show. It was the most unrealistic thing. I think it was from David Sirota. The most unrealistic thing about Terminator 2 is that this AI, soon to be millionaire that creates this technology, wants to actually stop it from happening and destroying the world. Um,
Yeah, it's the old Aladdin and the lamp kind of thing. You may not like what you wish for. I mean, it seems like right now, if we want to talk about modern day in terms of movies, that like a mixture of the Terminator, the Matrix, 1984, and Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times. With this ridiculous clown throwing the whole globe up and down on a daily basis and keeping everything in chaos. But with the Terminator, which I dearly love. Um, it's the machines versus the humans, but I don't really see it that way. I think we've all, famously, we're kind of all cyborgs now.
mm,
I mean, we walk around with our little mechanical brains,
mhm.
and right now I'm interfacing with you, with this one of the screens that dominates my life, and all information is being filtered through these mechanisms that are actually not increasing our knowledge base but decreasing it because it decides what we want to see. So I kind of think of the world now as, you know Silicon Valley imposters used to say, well, the singularity is going to come, and that's the moment when when machines will be smarter than humans, and they'll take over, and we'll either be transhumans, or there just won't be, Homo sapiens the way we've always thought of it. Well, actually, and I'm not the first to notice that the singularity has already come. I mean, it came with the Industrial Revolution. We're increasingly bounded by the machine world in terms of what we do, and machines, have agency. And it's interesting. In indigenous philosophies, we think, all things are connected. The rocks, the trees, the deer, the wolverines, the birds, the eagles, the oceans, the sands, they're all our relatives, and I subscribe to that. I don't think that there's such a thing as an inanimate object. I mean, rocks have like this very active life on a different time scale than we have, and we need to respect that. So machines fit into that. I mean, I think they're our relatives too. But the question is, are we commanding them, or are they increasingly commanding us, or are we operating in this kind of quasi symbiotic manner in which we're serving each other's needs? Because the imperative of most forms, and I'm not going to say organic necessarily because they can be so-called inorganic, is reproduction of form. And machines reproduce themselves, humans reproduce ourselves, we reproduce our societies, even when they're falling into tremendous decay, as it is here in the United States today. Possibly transformative decay, one can only hope. But to keep ourselves separate from machines, I think, is a categorical error. We
Mhm.
need to recognize that we're part of this kind of this fractal,
Mhm.
this organic, self-organizing, complex adaptive system, to refer to chaos theory in physics and also biology, in which systems grow themselves. And so, it's kind of ludicrous to think that the humans are calling the shots here. It's already the combination of human machine that's calling the shots. And unfortunately, there's an element within the human dialectic that is, the wealthy element, the capitalist element, the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, the elite, whatever you want to call it, that is basically transmitting through the machinery what people should be thinking, and people are confused and they're psychologically unprepared to examine the world without looking through the screen. You know, the evolutionary
Mm.
psychologists famously said that we're Stone Age mentalities with 21st century weapons, and that's very true. We're still programmed for fight and flight and cortisol and all these hormonal and adrenal mechanisms that govern our way of thinking. There is no such thing as rationality. Rationality is Robert Sapolsky, the famous neuroscientist at Stanford, had so succinctly put, is the excuse we make to explain what we already did. So, you know, let's throw the Enlightenment out the window. It wasn't any good to begin with. And let's talk about what the connections are. And then how does that fit into the advent of AI? What is AI and why is war driving it? So, I will say that one of the reasons that we can talk about military AI is because the whole purpose, the whole corporate driven evolution of computation, of which AI is just an iteration, has always been driven by military necessity and by um, government funding, specifically the CIA through its InQtel Silicon Valley venture capitalist firm. For example, in around 2003,
Mhm.
Silicon Valley went to the CIA for money to fund Palantir, which is in the news a lot. And Palantir is owned by one of the bros that came out of the PayPal mafia, which is Musk and Peter Thiel and a few others. And so Palantir formed as a private corporation. This is subject of my first article, One Ring to Rule Them All. You know, naming itself after all these tropes in Lord of the Rings. Which is interesting because um, they kind of turn things upside down. They with Palantir, for example, they use the uh, seeing stone that Tolkien talked about that was used by the Dark Lord Sauron to locate his enemies and then annihilate him. Of course, the enemies that Peter Thiel would want to locate and annihilate are not necessarily the ones that you or I would. In fact, we might want to locate him. But they have this cute little Lord of the Rings motif going on, and then they've got this myth that they all came out of Sausalito and The Well, which was the first online chat thing that I used to actually participate in back in the 90s. It was kind of fun. But the military and the CIA pretty much glommed onto that fairly quickly and started throwing money at him. So I think a lot of that's covered very well by Yasha Levine in his 2018 book Surveillance Valley, which is about the militarization of Google, which is horrifying in its origins and continues to horrify as it grows. But Google was not funded to do no evil. It was funded to promote military and intelligence activities. So Thiel founded Palantir in 2003, and immediately they had a lot of contracts with the CIA and Homeland Security, which later became ICE to surveil the border. And they have these programs, Foundry and Gotham are two of them, that sit on top of large databases. Like the National Security Agency vacuums up unfathomable amounts of data every single day from all over the world. No human being or even 1,000 human beings can sit and watch all this and pull out the meaningful activities. They have to have computer programs to do that. And the latest iteration is the Palantir programs that are pretty good at locating patterns inside these huge databases. And they can be instructed to look for, people with brown skin or people that are holding hands crossing the Texas border, trying to swim across a river, things like that. And then locate, all their relatives and find out where they're going to, and then arrest them and put them into privately run prisons and things like that. So Palantir is one of the nastiest groups that ever, came out of the American corporate empire. And it is increasingly powerful under the new regime, the Trump regime. It went public in 2020. So at that point, it had to start filing SEC reports, and we could learn something about its financial structures and what it was doing. Most of its contracts are with American and European and foreign militaries and intelligence agencies, and also some multinationals like Coca-Cola, which are kind of military in their own way, I suppose. Um, and their modus of operation was to continually run at a loss, which is to spend more money on their operations than they were gaining in revenue, which makes sense in the financial world of Silicon Valley, because then if you run at a loss, you don't have to pay taxes. And people like Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen and Elon Musk and the rest of them, they hate more than anything paying taxes. I mean, they're sitting on top of hundreds of billions of dollars, and they don't want you to have any of it. They don't want you to have a library book or Medicare or Medicaid or anything like that. They just want you to buy their products. But they're not thinking it through, because you have to have a job to do that with, right? However, we won't go down that rabbit hole. Let's go back to Peter Thiel. And so when they went public, it suddenly became known that they weren't paying any taxes, but a huge amount of their money was coming from the United States military industrial ventures. And then Trump was elected, and their stock like tripled. So Palantir suddenly was worth, with 3,000 employees, was worth um, uh, 10 times, more than 10 times, the value of Lockheed Martin, which has like 30,000 employees. I mean, Palantir is worth like $200 billion, and Lockheed's worth like $120 billion. So why is it worth all that when Lockheed obviously is making submarines and airplanes and hardware and has been around for a long time, and is gets more money than any other government contractor, and pretty much can tell Congress what to do? They're being superseded in a way by these companies that produce software that don't necessarily have to have huge shipyards and make missiles and things like that, although they do that too. But it's all software based, and they are they're using their political and cultural powers to create uses for their products. Now, their products, which we'll get into the efficacy of in a moment, because a lot of their funding comes from the military, they make weapons, right? They're not being funded to make wheat that can grow with no water or other sorts of useful products. They're making necro products. They're making products that kill people, because that's where the money is under late stage monopoly capitalism. So what they need, if they make these products, is, guess what? They need wars. They have to have wars, otherwise nobody's going to need their products. Currently, the big shibboleth that is being touted by Peter Thiel and people like Eric Schmidt, who we can get into, and Mark Andreessen and the rest of the Silicon Valley oligarchs, is China. They actually, and I read about this a lot in my stories, they actually want to go to war with China. They're preparing us to do that, and the armaments are now being deployed to do that, especially over the last couple of weeks. I mean, I think the Trump regime just issued an executive order a couple of days ago saying that we have to elevate China from what they had called our pacing competitor to our prime enemy. And when capitalism gets in trouble in trade wars and stuff like that, they usually go into hot wars to create a lot of destruction and rebuild again. And usually the entity with the most money and the most advanced weapons comes out on top, like the United States did after World War II. So